The next thing I want to say is that the hard virtues are embodied by men and masculinity, whereas the soft virtues are embodied by women and femininity. Now, please don't misunderstand me here. I'm not suggesting that all women are liberals and all men are conservatives. That would clearly not be true. But what I am saying is that the soft virtues are essentially feminine in their nature and can be most visibly seen in women, whereas the hard virtues are essentially masculine in nature and can be most visibly seen in men. So perhaps it will make most sense if I simply say that liberals of both sexes are more likely to describe themselves as being feminists. So a male liberal will typically describe himself as being a feminist, whereas conservatives of both sexes are more likely to value traditional masculine traits, what men are bringing to the table, and typically they will value male leadership as well. I'll work my way down the column in an attempt to explain this concept a bit better. And I'll start at the top by saying that men tend to process the world primarily through their head, whereas women tend to process it primarily through their heart. Men are primarily thinkers, women are primarily feelers. Now, in practice, this fact means that men tend to be less emotional than women. This is one of the most easily distinguishable and talked about differences between the sexes, that men are less emotional than women. They cry less, for example. They're also typically less animated in showing excitement or enthusiasm as well. Now, that's not to say that they never cry or never get excited, but they're just on a more emotional even keel in the main. Sometimes that means that a man's emotional state is a much harder read compared to a woman. Maybe you're not quite sure where a man is emotionally sometimes. If they're happy or sad, you might not know either way because they're good at sort of hiding it. Women, on the other hand, find it much harder to hide how they're feeling. If they're happy or sad, you tend to know which one it is either way. Being centered in the mind means that men tend to be more interested in concepts, technology, statistics, and problem-solving projects. Men love a problem to solve. Indeed, we can simply say that men are often more interested in things than in people. For this reason, men tend to gravitate towards STEM jobs, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In 2021, even after years of concerted efforts to make STEM jobs more attractive to women, men still made up 61% of those in physical sciences, 63% in mathematical sciences, 81% in computer sciences, and 81% in engineering sciences. Women, however, being centered in the heart, are far more relational than men. They're far more interested in people than in things. So while a man's mind is occupied by his new PC build or how he's going to construct that wall out the back and overcome that tricky slope, the woman is far more likely thinking about relational things, how her friend Olivia is doing since she had her baby. She's wondering if she should take a cake to Sarah because she was ill recently, or whether she should phone Louise and have a catch up. She's concerned with communication and relational things, forming bonds essentially with other human beings. So this is where memes like this begin to come into play. The woman, because relational things are filling her mind, assume that that's also what's filling the man's mind. But instead, he's actually thinking about concepts and things and ideas and problems. There's a bit of truth to these memes. I'm also reminded of this sketch from the BBC a few years ago.
A man has ruined a weekend away with his girlfriend by saying what he was thinking. Our reporter Emma Bradford is at the scene.
Martin Bishop and Eleanor Shaw had stopped at a cosy country pub after a romantic walk when Miss Shaw looked up meaningfully at Bishop and asked what he was thinking at that very moment. The weekend was about to go very wrong indeed.
I was hoping he would say, maybe this would be a great place to bring the kids one day. Or even something corny but sweet, like, I have everything I'll ever need right here.
And what did you say, Martin?
I said, pigs are much bigger than you expect. I've just seen some pigs. One of them was so big you could ride it.
The female focus on people and the male focus on things means that women are far more pro-social than men. They tend to talk more, they communicate more, they tend to have a far stronger support network of friends as well, and they're more dependent on those relationships than men are. Men could find it very difficult to make friends and are more likely to have no friends at all because they're just not as good at this part of life, especially these days when technology has really isolated us. Even when men make friends, it tends to be centered around a thing first and foremost, a job, a hobby, a sport. Men tend to put the thing first, and then they relate around that thing. They congregate around that thing and become friends because of the thing. So maybe it's a sports team, it's a club, it's a project, it's a church, whatever it may be, the thing tends to come first and they relate around it. Women are far more talented and skilled at just being able to meet people face to face for no other reason than just a chat, just to spend some time relating over tea or coffee or a lunch. And it's the female strength in this area that means that when people get married, the husband often relies on the wife to bring people into his life. She's often the one that brings the warmth of society into his life. She invites people over and the two guys become friends through her.
Let me tell you something. From afar, observing you throughout the years, you've become a lot more open to meeting people. And again, this is from afar, and I think it's from your wife.
There's no question about it.
So your wife kind of took you out of that, is she the social one?
Yeah, she's a normal person. She likes things that anyone would like. Just being a human being.
Yeah.
I have none of that.
My wife calls me a cat, like I'm always hiding underneath the couch, and I gotta be coerced to come out.
Well, women do this for men in general. Women socialize men.
Yeah.
This relational strength and interest means that women are often more drawn towards relational nurturing jobs as well, like nursing and education. About 90% of nurses in the world are women, and about 76% of teachers in the world are women. The female focus on people and the male focus on things can often lead to crossed wires in romantic relationships as well. They can often be at cross purposes. So for example, when a woman pours out her heart to tell her husband about her problems, his instinct is that she's presenting him with a problem to solve. He leads with the mind, you see, and that's what he instinctively does with problems. He tries to fix them. So he's processing it analytically and he's trying to find out rational solutions. However, that's not necessarily what the woman actually wants out of the conversation. She doesn't necessarily want the problem solved. She just wants him to listen. For her, sharing from the heart is just the end goal of the whole conversation. Just talking about it is what it's all about. That's helping to form bonds and creating relational closeness. That's all she really wants from the whole thing. Now, of course, both of them then need to show patience and make an effort with each other in this respect. Men need to make an effort when the woman's focus on people is causing her to talk at great lengths about people he doesn't know and has no interest in. People from work, what Olivia, Sarah, and Louise are up to. He wonders why his wife would think that he would have an interest in people he doesn't know. Perhaps even more patience is needed when it's about celebrity gossip, celebrity couples and relationships. Celebrities in general.
Peter, look at this. She actually wore this to an awards ceremony.
Huh? Oh, yeah, crazy.
Unreal. Peter, look. Look. Peter, look. Peter. Flats. Flats!
Similarly, the woman needs to show patience when the man's focus on things is causing him to obsess about sports statistics, car specs, tech announcements, or whatever else it may be. One final thing before we move on from this head versus heart stuff. Being centered in the heart makes women more empathetic than men. This is Patrice Evra, a French footballer who as a child was homeless on the streets of France. And he's telling the story of how when he made it as a pro footballer for the first time as a 17-year-old, he was given his own room for the very first time, a clean bed for the first time in his life, a brand new tracksuit, and a new pair of boots. He said it was the first time, as he sat down to eat with his teammates, it was the first time he'd ever eaten a meal with a proper knife and fork, and the first time he'd ever been served food as well. And as he describes the pride and gratitude he felt over these very simple things that we all take for granted, there are three hosts, two men and a woman, and you can guess which one is clearly feeling his emotion the most keenly.
Is it crazy to think how quickly you went from, like you just said yourself, begging on the streets in front of shops to that moment? Because you were still a teenager.
No, yeah, I was 17, but it was like, when I arrive and I see I will have my own room and all those stuff, for me, it was like, that's it. I don't need any more. I don't need any more. I was living my best life. And, you know, my mom, like I remember the first day she came to watch me play a game, she cries straight away.
All right, this is perhaps where I really begin to get into trouble, when I say that men tend to be more predictable, stable, consistent, and straightforward in their moods compared to women who can be a bit more up and down. Men are generally on a more even keel, you could say. When I was at university, I had a part-time job at Costco Wholesale working on the front end as a cashier. There was a team of supervisors, we called them soups, who were in charge of the department, and they were all female except for one guy. Now, we used to joke amongst ourselves about the stark differences and how that one guy really stood out in contrast with the female soups. With the female soups, you never quite knew which mood they were going to be in from day to day. Sometimes they were up, sometimes they were down. If you needed something, a day off or hours rescheduled, you would never ask them first thing in the morning. You would always take some time to gauge what kind of mood they were in. You would discuss it amongst yourselves. Are they in a good mood today? In a bad mood today? With the male soup, however, Russell was his name, you got the exact same mood every single day. Now, that's not to say that we liked him any more than the female soups, but it's just that contrast between them was just so noticeable. The guy was the steady Eddie and the women were a bit more up and down. I think to their credit, women are quite aware of this. They're aware that they're subject to fluctuating emotions and moods, and this perhaps plays a role in the fact that women tend to trust their own judgment less than men. Women will tend to second guess their decisions more often and be a bit more uncertain. And it's even been noted that in speech, women tend to use more what's called tentative speech. Studies have discovered 4 main kinds of tentative language that women use more than men. The first is expressions of uncertainty and disclaimers. So whereas men will say the meeting is tomorrow, women might say, I'm not sure if this is right, but I think the meeting is tomorrow, even if she knows for sure that it is. Second, women use more hedges or modifiers. So when a man says the presentation was short, a woman might say, I guess the presentation was kind of short. Women will also put more questions onto the end of direct statements. So where a man might say, it's a beautiful day, a woman might say, it's a beautiful day, isn't it? Looking for confirmation and feedback from whoever she's talking to. And finally, women will use more intensifiers. So where a man might say the report was hard and be done with it, a woman will say the report was so hard or very hard, and that extra word kind of diminishes the directness of the statement. Women can also add more upward inflections at the end of sentences as a way of seeking affirmation and feedback from whoever she's talking to as well. Now, women being less certain may also feed into the idea that women are more persuadable than men in some ways. I heard the story recently of how Mary Berry, the famous TV chef, got married. It was the 1960s and her boyfriend Paul proposed to her. Now, she wasn't sure, she didn't know her own mind about this yet, so she said no. Paul persisted, he asked again, but again she was still in two minds. She didn't know exactly what she wanted, so she said no. Finally, Paul said, look, I'm getting too old. This is the last time I'll ask you. If you say no again, I'll have to walk away. Mary was convinced, she was persuaded, she said yes to that third proposal, and over 50 years later, they've had the happiest of marriages. It turned out to be the best thing they could have done. They've now got many children and grandchildren. These stories are very common, especially from that era. Stories of how a man was single-minded in his pursuit of a woman. He knew what he wanted, he went after it. The woman didn't yet know exactly her own thoughts for certain, but she could potentially be persuaded. And now, decades later, they're still happily married. You rarely hear these stories with the roles reversed though. Men are not as easily persuadable because they tend to have reasoned things out in their mind already and they trust their judgment more. Once they have a target, they fix on it, which has an upside in that it means that men can be very persistent towards a certain goal. But the downside of that is that it means men can be very stubborn as well. Persistence and stubbornness is just two sides of the same coin. Persistence is directed towards a good thing and stubbornness is directed towards a bad thing. Remember how Lefebvre and Frank's 2013 study said that liberals score more highly in the trait of dependence, meaning those who centre on the soft virtues are looking for more guidance and leadership and authority. And remember how conservatives are more likely to act independently and take responsibility upon their own shoulders. Well, this kind of plays out in the relationship between men and women as well. Women traditionally are more dependent and they look for more strong male leadership from their husbands. Women traditionally look for a man who can give them a sense of stability, security, a man who knows what he's doing in life, who has a direction, a goal, who's clear-minded, and who can make decisive decisions about the way forward. Women look for this in men because they don't always feel that within themselves. And good men generally want to provide this for women. They want to take that responsibility of leadership upon their shoulders. And this is also, of course, why feminists make a big deal of being independent of men and not needing men for that purpose. They don't like that norm. They want to get away from it. Of course, Natural female empathy, which we looked at earlier as a strength, and it is a strength in so many ways for forming relationships, that can also have a downside when it comes to leadership, in the sense that it makes them more susceptible to emotional manipulation. Once a man has decided upon a course of action, tears are unlikely to persuade him to change his mind. He's kind of immune to that. He is very pragmatic and almost cold-hearted at times about following his goal. A woman finds it much harder to persist with her decision, however, if she sees that it's going to make people upset and distressed, because she feels their pain and their distress more keenly. I'll just go off on one final slight tangent here. I've started digging a hole, so I might as well keep on going. The Queen Mother was 101 years old when she died, and she's reported to have said that after a century of observing governments come and go, she had a lot of experience watching these things, watching politics. She concluded that the best political situation in the UK was when there was a strong Conservative government leading and in power, but with good opposition course-correcting, supporting, and bringing awareness of causes that maybe Conservatives weren't thinking about. And I think there's a good parallel there in terms of family governance, family leadership as well. The way that we've traditionally ordered the family, and the biblical model too, is to have strong male leadership providing direction, stability, security, and strength, but with the wife bringing support, bringing empathy, warmth, family, life, love, personal connections, and all of those good things as well. That's what makes for the best government of a country, when it's Conservatives leading, supported by Liberals, and that's what makes for the best government of a family as well. A strong family, a strong husband leading, supported by a wife who is supportive and empathetic and all those other great things that she can do that he's less good at. Now, to finish, and for the sake of brevity, let's just group all of these values together, and I'll just make some general observations from both sides to demonstrate why these can rightly be called masculine values and these can rightly be called feminine values. So earlier on, we looked at competition versus cooperation. Well, if you leave young boys alone to play their own games and come up with their own games, you will notice that they naturally gravitate towards competitive ones. With winners and losers, that's just a natural impulse in boys to be competitive. Whereas when you leave young girls alone to play their own games, they will naturally gravitate towards cooperative ones, where the aim is not to win, but simply to strengthen relationships and to act in unison with one another. I remember playing tennis with my sister as a kid. I've got an older sister, and it used to really frustrate me because my sister refused to play competitive matches. She only ever wanted to play rallies. That is, work together to keep the ball going back and forth for as long as possible without it hitting the net. She didn't want to keep score. She wasn't interested in creating winners and losers. She wasn't much interested in rules either. If the ball landed outside the line, that didn't matter. We just keep it going. She just wanted to cooperate. Now, as a boy, I didn't understand this. Nobody wins? What's the point in this? I remember imploring her just to play one competitive set, but she never ever wanted to. Whereas when I played tennis with my best friend Brendan, however, when it was boys playing, it got competitive. We would play regulation rules. If there was any dispute about line calls, the whole match would have to come to a stop and we'd argue about it until it was resolved. That we were playing fair with one another, that justice was being done was very, very important. Also, at the end of the day, one of us would win and the other would lose. If it was a tie, then we'd have a tie break, but one of us had to win and the other one would have to lose. In fact, I remember one year, I think it was around 12 years old, Brendan had a tennis birthday party. And it was a competition and there was a trophy for it and everything. And this is that trophy because I won that competition and I've kept it this whole time. We didn't mind that creating winners and losers created inequality. And if one of us felt bad about it, that just made us more determined to come back and win the next one. Now, back in my childhood, I remember watching girls play their games, and they played lots of cooperative skipping games, for example, where they had to chant in unison. That was a key part, they had to chant in unison with one another. I remember they used to do this hand patting game that I later discovered was called pat-a-cake. The aim was just to mirror one another's movements and again chant a rhyme together in unison. I remember they used to like taking care of dolls and playing fantasy games around inviting friends for tea or getting married. I remember they roped a kid in and there was this fake wedding ceremony in the playground one time. As they grew older, I remember they would sit in huddles, simply having conversations, often about boys and relationships. The boys would be off playing football, again, relating around a concept, a thing, but the girls would just sit and talk. face to face. It was all very relational. And they began to mirror one another in their clothes as well. It seemed that once one girl wore something to school, the next week all the other girls would appear wearing the exact same thing. So the girls' instinctive play behavior was always centered around mirroring one another, creating unity, forming bonds, and being relational. I remember being genuinely baffled about the appeal of pat-a-cake, though, in particular. I mean, why are they patting their hands together? What's the purpose of this? Who wins? How'd you win this game? I just didn't understand it. At that same age, my friends would be trying to beat one another in some way. All the boys would be trying to play football and win at that, or they're trying to win at video games or racing bikes, or even just fighting. I mean, not real fighting, but I remember being at Brandon's house and we just watched wrestling on TV and we decided to try figure of four movements on each other. So the idea with a figure of four is that if you inflict it on the opponent, they experience pain, but it's possible for them to flip reverse it, and if they do, then the pain transfers back to the original person. So we would spend ages trying to outmuscle one another, trying to flip one another over so that the pain would go back and forth. Again, competition, competitive. Boys are always testing one another against themselves, and that's where the fun lies. I also remember being at Brandon's house one time and eating crisps and drinking juice, or potato chips if you're in North America. And a game was suddenly decided, a competition where we had to throw a crisp across the room, across the table, and try and land it in the other person's juice. And then the loser would have to eat the soggy crisps and they'd have to drink the juice. When it happened, we just couldn't stop laughing. And I have to keep emphasizing the importance of justice and rules to boys as well. There were very strict rules around that game. And I well remember when boys were arguing about rules when we were playing football or, some other game. When we were arguing about whether someone had broken a law, nearby girls would get upset about that conflict and they would shout things like, "What does it matter? It's only a game." In other words, who cares if somebody bent the rules a little bit? Let's just all get along. Let's just cooperate. That didn't compute with the boys. Of course that matters. If we don't settle this, then we don't know who's won or lost the game. And that's the whole point. That's the whole reason that we're playing. Now, in adulthood, neither men or women deviate too much from these early behaviors. Men can still obsess about sports decisions for years and argue with each other all night about whether that player's foot was over the line and whether the referee made the right call. And while they're doing that, women are still more keen to watch TV shows about relationships and soaps and celebrities and celebrity gossip, or they'd rather be on the phone to a friend or planning a social gathering. It pretty much stays the same all throughout life. Now, of course, these are all generalizations and there are lots of exceptions to this. I'm sure that lots of men are saying, but I'm more sociable than my wife, and lots of women are saying, but I'm more competitive than my husband. But hopefully, I've just been able to establish here why I say that these are essentially masculine values and these are essentially feminine values. Because if we accept that premise, and I'm here laying one of the final pieces of this foundation of the series, if we accept this kind of premise, then it's going to make the rest of the series make a whole lot of sense.